Bon après-midi.
Good afternoon. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 78 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022. And therefore, members can attend in person in the room here or remotely using the Zoom application.
Everyone, as I did in the last meeting, that all participants, that although the room is equipped with a powerful audio system, feedback events can occur. These can be extremely harmful to the interpreters and cause serious injuries. The most common cause of sound feedback is an earpiece worn too close to the microphone. Therefore, we ask that all participants exercise a high degree of caution when handling the earpieces, especially when your microphone or your neighbor's microphone is turned on. In order to prevent incidents and safeguard the hearing health of our interpreters, I invite participants to ensure that they speak into the microphone into which their headset is plugged in, and to avoid manipulating the earbuds by placing them on the table away from the microphone when they are not in use. En cas de difficulté technique,
Should any technical challenges arise, please advise me right away. Please note that we may need to suspend a few minutes in order to ensure that all members are able to fully participate in our discussion. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-3H and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, April 25th, 2023, the committee is studying the appointment of the Honourable Navdeep Bains as Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Rogers Communications. I would now like to welcome our witness for the first hour today, our two witnesses.
Nancy Belanger is with us again, Commissioner of Lobbying, and from the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, Lynn Robinson-Dalpé, Director, Advisory and Compliance. Madame Belanger, la parole.
Ms. Belanger, the floor is yours for a 5-minute opening statement. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm appearing before you today to explain the lobbying restrictions under the Lobbying Act that apply to designated public office holders when they leave federal office. Under the Act and its regulations, designated positions include those held by ministers and their staff, and by many senior executives within government, such as deputy ministers, chief executive officers, associate or assistant deputy ministers, and other executives of comparable rank. Members of the House of Commons and the Senate are also designated public office holders. Please allow me to say at the outset that I cannot discuss particulars of any matter, as such information would be personal to the individual involved, and I must respect confidentiality.
Bans any former designated public office holder from lobbying as a consultant or as an employee of an organization for 5 years after leaving federal office. However, if a former designated public office holder is employed by a corporation, the Act only bans the individual from lobbying when it would constitute a significant part of the individual's work on behalf of the corporation. In practice, this means that such an individual can lobby as an in-house lobbyist if the lobbying is less than approximately 20% of their work-related duties for the corporation. There is no clear, rational explanation as to why the 5-year restriction applies differently, depending on whether the former designated public office holder is employed by an organization as opposed to a corporation. In February 2021, I raised this discrepancy in my preliminary recommendations for improving the Lobbying Act. I believe this should be studied and addressed by amending the Act. As Commissioner of Lobbying, I do not have the authority to approve or give clearance with respect to where a former designated public office holder decides to work. Mon rôle est de veiller à ce qu'ils
My role is to ensure that they understand their obligations under the Lobbying Act. Failure to comply with the 5-year restriction on lobbying is an offense under the Act, and it is therefore important that it be clearly understood. My role is also to investigate should there be concerns of non-compliance with this restriction.
Thank you for your attention, and I will welcome any questions.
Okay, thank you, Madame Bélanger. Madame Robinson-Dalpé, la parole est pour...
The floor is now yours. Ms. Robinson-Dalpé, you have 5 minutes. Welcome. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I would like to speak today about an important aspect of the Conflict of Interest Act, the post-employment rules that are administered by the office and found in Part 3 of the Act. These rules are in place to ensure that individuals who leave public office not misuse their insider knowledge or influence for personal gain, which they acquired during their years at work. All post-employment rules apply to reporting public office holders, while only certain rules apply to public office holders, as they do not need to declare as many matters. So what do these rules entail? Some are time-bound and some apply indefinitely.
Leaving public office, individuals are prohibited from accepting board positions, offers of employment, or contracts for a specific period. This cooling-off period varies depending on the position held. It applies to all reporting public office holders and is for the duration of 1 year for most, except in the case of ministers, where its duration is 2 years. The purpose of this rule is to prevent former reporting public office holders from using their connections to secure positions immediately after leaving their office where they had direct and significant official dealings in the year prior to their departure. Direct and significant dealings are determined case by case. Most registered communications in the lobbying registry are significant dealings. However, each of them must be reviewed based on fact to ensure appropriate advice is provided. Secondly, during the same cooling-off period, those same individuals are restricted from making representations, even if they are unpaid, to departments and organizations with which they had direct and significant official dealings in their last year of office. These rules are found in subsections 35.1 and 35.2 of the Conflict of Interest Act. There is a third restriction in subsection 35.3 specific to former ministers that prohibits them during the same 2-year cooling-off period from making representations to a current minister who is also minister at the same time as they were. Further, during the cooling-off period, communications and meetings arranged with any public office holder as defined under the Lobbying Act need to be captured on a form for filing activities under Section 37 of the Conflict of Interest Act, which is available on our website, and regardless of whether the meeting actually took place and whether the former reporting public office holder attended the meeting. These are the rules that are time-bound and apply only to reporting public office holders. Additional post-employment rules apply to all former public office holders, regardless of the type of position the person held, and apply indefinitely. These matters are related to specific area of their previous responsibilities and found in sections 33 and 34 in Part 3 of the Act. No person who has ever been subject to the Conflict of Interest Act can take improper advantage of their previous office for personal benefit or influence in a manner that raises questions about integrity and conflicts of interest. Nor can a person switch sides on any matter for which they acted or provided advice to the Crown by then aligning with another person or organization for the opposing side. Finally, they cannot provide advice based upon information obtained while they were a public office holder that is not in the public domain. For these indefinite prohibitions, there are no exemptions, waivers, or reductions. The post-employment rules are to be taken seriously to protect the public interest and hold individuals accountable for their actions. Violations of the rules can lead to an examination and subsequent report, or can even lead to the issuance of an order demanding any current public office holder to not have official dealings with the former public office holder. In the matter which has brought us together today, I can affirm that Mr. Baines has permitted the office to confirm publicly that he sought and obtained advice from the office on the post-employment rules. He has passed the 2-year cooling-off period and is at liberty to accept employment while keeping in mind that Sections 33 and 34 of the Act apply indeterminately. En conclusion,
In conclusion, the Conflict of Interest Act includes important post-employment rules to prevent former public office holders from using their influence or insider knowledge for personal gain. These rules establish cooling-off periods and restrict certain activities that apply for life. By doing so, we safeguard the integrity of our public institutions and maintain the trust of Canadians.
merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Ms. Robinson-Delpay.
For committee, typically we would have the Ethics Commissioner here. We really appreciate you being here today in the absence of an Ethics Commissioner. Mr. Barrett, we're going to go to you for 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. So I have the same set of questions for both of you, but I'm actually going to start with you, Commissioner, if I can. Ms. Robinson-Delpay, on what date did you provide that advice to Mr. Baines?
I don't have the exact date. My apologies. It was early April.
Early April. And who was the commissioner, the ethics commissioner at that time?
At that time, we did have an interim commissioner. Ms. Richard was.
Okay. Was there any concern raised about the connection between Mr. Baines and the interim commissioner, in that there was a familial relationship between the interim commissioner
Point of
and
order,
one of Mr. Baines?
Mr. Chair.
Based on what standing order?
On relevance, I don't think that, and
I've dealt with this before. Members have a wide range of questions that they can ask. Mr. Barrett is asking those questions. It's his time. Please continue, Mr. Barrett.
I think you got the question, ma'am.
When the public office holder contacted our office, the advisor was the one that received the information. So the normal course of action is when a public office holder has the questions with regards to their obligations under the Act, they contact their advisor. When the advisor receives the information and then makes an assessment of the information that they've received, at that point in time, they look at precedents and they make a recommendation, or they contact their manager or myself, the director. If there are any particular matters that should be raised to the commissioner at that point in time, it is raised with the commissioner. In this case, I did raise it with the management team to inform them of the appointment. However, there was no decision that was required because Mr. Baines had the 2-year cooling-off period had lapsed.
And had he taken the position at the time that he sought the advice of your office? Had he already joined the company?
Unfortunately, because of confidentiality issues, and I did not seek permission from Mr. Baines to confirm when the advice was
Yeah, fair enough.
received. So
yeah, no,
I can't-
and
sorry.
I'll say that I appreciate that you did get some latitude on what you were able to come and say. Are you able to say, or can you tell us how many investigations have been initiated by your office since April?
I can say that there are currently no active investigations ongoing.
Okay. With respect to waivers, is your office able to grant any waivers or initiate any investigations at this time?
Waivers are, it's a section of the Act, and therefore, in the case of public office holders seeking waivers for post-employment restrictions, we cannot provide those waivers at this point in time without a commissioner, because it's a requirement that a commissioner makes that determination, and it's the same thing with investigations.
Right, so no investigations and no waivers can be granted.
Not at this time. However, as was mentioned by my colleagues in May, we continue to monitor activities of public office holders, and if we have doubts or if we require something comes to our attention that requires looking into, we will do that. We will do our due diligence on our side for when a commissioner is appointed.
For sure. Are you able to say if there's been, I appreciate that you can't or don't commence investigations at the request of the public. Can you say if there's been public correspondence with respect to this matter? Is that something that you can speak to?
Unfortunately, again, there's a number of information that comes from either the public or the media
Sure.
that we take into consideration when we review a file, and therefore I can't comment how many requests we've had or anything like that. However, if there is information that is brought to our attention, we look into it.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. How much time do I have, Chair?
Roughly a minute.
Okay. Great. Commissioner, all the same questions. 50 seconds. No, I'm just joking. Are you able to say? Are you able to say how much correspondence, if any, that you've received on this matter from members of the public?
From the public, I've received none.
Okay. Is there? Are you able to speak to the timeline that you were contacted by Mr. Baines, or if you were contacted by Mr. Baines on this issue?
Well, Mr. Bain has made public that he had received clearance from our respective offices, and it would have been at the same the exact date I'm not sure. It would be sometime in April.
Okay.
Don't have it in front of me. And of course, in my case, it's simply to ensure that he understands the limitations about lobbying, which, because the corporation he's working with is a corporation, it could be up to 20%. Although he has made public that he does not intend to communicate with the federal government.
Right, and he's the individual responsible for government affairs for the organization.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Appreciate that. Ms. Sachs, I have you for 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, Commissioner Belanger, thank you for joining us again, and Madame Robinson-Delpay. So, Commissioner Belanger, you just said a moment ago to my colleague that Mr. Baines has been quite public about the fact that he came to reach out to both your offices, as a matter of fact, proactively, before to ensure that the position with Rogers was compliant. Was it in fact compliant? Simple yes or no, with both your offices.
It'll be compliant as long as there is no communication with the federal government
Correct.
above and beyond the 20% that he's entitled to do.
Correct. Okay.
Because those are the rules.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course.
And the same with our office, as long as he continues to comply with sections 33 and 34 of the Act, he's in compliance.
Okay, wonderful. And if I do a little bit of math in terms of timelines, and you've mentioned this both in your opening statements, that he has passed the 2-year cooling off period that would enable him to pursue the role that he's been offered?
Exactly. He's beyond the 2-year and therefore can accept any employment.
Okay, so, when we did our study on the Lobbying Code of Conduct, we learned that many political staff and former public office holders regularly move into industries afterwards where their expertise in government can be utilized. We heard quite a bit about that. We had much discussion. So would you agree that these types of moves are fairly regular? And you could call it the Ottawa bubble or across Canada, but it does happen. Obviously, we raised it in the study.
Yeah, but I don't have numbers if it happens often, that people from Ottawa move into private sector.
Well, based on those who inquire at both your offices to check that they're in compliance or not, would you say it's fairly regular?
So former designated public office holders, in the last year, we've probably had communications with 200 and some people about their obligations, whether or not they choose to go work in organizations or corporations or choose to do the 20% lobbying, that I don't know.
Right. And Madame Robinson-Delpay?
In our case, I can't comment on that. However, I do know that there's an average of 300 and some reporting public office holder or public office holders that leave offices during a yearly period. So there's
So it's not one or two.
It's not.
It's not one or two. So it is. You could call that fairly regular on a year in, a year out. And to both of you, do these individuals who do check with you, do they regularly check on their compliance? Are they in communication with you? Do you have any folks that come back to check in from time to time?
I would say so. I mean, some people understand the prohibition is 5 years of not communicating with a federal official, so they should just not lobby, except for those who work for corporations who do have some wiggle room. They will check as to what constitutes lobbying, and if they're not sure, before they pick up a phone or decide to write a letter, they will sometimes call us, yes.
So there's a proactive approach to this.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
Mr. Baines as well took a proactive approach in his reaching out to both your offices.
Yes.
Would that be correct?
Yep.
Okay. If we go back in history, because it does happen. We have cases that come up. Baker McKenzie garnered several contracts with Global Affairs during the Harper government years, with one contract valued at about $285,000, while Peter MacKay was minister. He's now a partner. He's been a partner with the firm since 2015 and was the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Did Mr. MacKay check with your offices in 2016 when he took on that role at Baker McKenzie before joining as partner?
I would not know. I was not there, so I'm sorry. I can't answer that question.
Would it be assumed that he would have checked? Would that be the proper practice to have checked at that time?
The office is proactive to reaching out to people when we know that they're leaving office. Not necessarily always the other way around. So I really can't answer that question if in that case he would have.
So if he was Minister of Foreign Affairs up until 2015 and was involved with a $285,000 contract and then joined a legal firm in 2016 after leaving office, based on the standards that we have today, would he be in compliance?
Well, I think it's probably more an answer because having a contract is not lobbying. So it's
Well, he was partner at the firm. The contract was secured by the firm that he then joined a year later when he was.
So on our side, essentially, the public office holder has to have had direct and significant official dealings with the entity. So it doesn't mean that if a contract was given to that organization or that the minister of the time had direct and significant official dealings with that organization. So I cannot comment on the specifics of this case. However, in general, this is how the rules are applied. The individual has to have had direct and significant official dealings.
So as a rule of thumb, the guidelines are in place and they're very clear, but would you say in what we're discussing today about Mr. Baines and he took this proactive steps of checking with both of your offices and he was past the cooling off period, would we say that maybe some of the discussion here is a little bit of the cart before the horse in terms of the concerns that are here?
When I'm asked to appear before committee, I'm here. So
Okay, and I
you.
think my time is up.
Yes, it is.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thanks, both of
Monsieur
you.
Villemure, vous
You have 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Ms. Bélanger. It's good to see you here again, and Ms. Robinson-Delpay as well for being here with us today. I have questions for both of you. Let me begin with you, Ms. Bélanger. Recently in the Gazette, you published the new ethics code for lobbyists. There are a number of new items in it. Since it's been published, I've noticed that some parliamentarians don't understand all the new nuances. I'd like you to tell us about, for example, traveling. Well, in my opinion, it was important for me to set out some rules about the traveling yearly offered by lobbyists. It seemed to me that, this might be linked to a sense of obligation once lobbying occurred. So I did create a rule based on which any registered lobbyist who offers one trip per year, then they should not carry out lobbying involving that person. So you can't give a gift by a registered lobbying organization to a public office holder if you intend to lobby that public office holder. Of the 28 corporations and organizations that did offer travel last year, only 6 of them are actually on the list. So there are a number of organizations and corporations who will be able to continue to offer a yearly trip without my having any oversight over this matter. However, obligations and corporations who are registered lobbyists and who do wish to offer a trip a year can still do so, and you can continue to accept their offer. However, they must get in touch with our office to ensure that there be some control over the time when the trip takes place and the lobbying that thereafter takes place, to ensure that there is a lapse of time to help ensure that there's no sense of obligation on your part regarding them. Because if you've had this, very expensive trip paid for by them, you might be more likely to pick up the phone when they call. So there remains some level of responsibility, yes. And let's say you've got an organization that's from outside Canada that's not a registered lobbyist then. That would be outside your purview. Yes, it has to be a registered lobbyist. The code applies to them. Thank you. Ms. Robinson-Delpay, same topic. Someone who today is offered a yearly trip by an organization that is registered as a lobbyist, as described by Ms. Bélanger. Let's describe this for us, if you can. Is it a problem for a parliamentarian? The answer is no. Why? Because the MP's code is very precise on this. One trip a year is acceptable. So there's no special test that is imposed as to whether you should or shouldn't accept that one trip a year. So the Member of Parliament is free to accept any such trip a year. Of course, we will want to take care to ensure that the MP checks with the lobbying commissioner because we don't want to put them in any precarious ethical situation. But the code, as written, does not ban accepting such trips. Yes, often it's just that little difference between the two, that MPs can be uncertain and do well to speak with you about these matters. In any case, all these matters should be declared. So, in the absence of a commissioner at present, can you undertake an investigation? As I said, the answer is no. We cannot launch any sort of investigation. Only the commissioner may do so. However, as we have explained, as soon as we have information shared with us, we do examine matters, the issue, so that we will be ready to present the issue to a new commissioner with a recommendation. Excuse me, I'm sorry to be putting the same question that you heard earlier in English, but I just wanted to make sure I got an answer in French. So, do you have a lot of files building up? I'm not looking for names. Yes, there are a certain number of files that are active at present or waiting for a commissioner's overview. The biggest issue for public office holders is that we cannot exempt them from any post-mandate requirements, and this could affect their future careers. So that's the sort of situation we see requests about. And the other situation is reimbursing costs. given that public office holders must cease all outside activities and do away with ownership of certain assets when they take their public office. Those are mostly what we get received questions about. So what do you hold to be a conflict of interest? Well, conflict of interest, that is defined in the Acts. There is a part of the Act which describes exactly what conflicts of interests are. Any situation where a designated public office holder or reporting public office holder would be involved in an activity where they hold official power or public office that gives them some possibility of obtaining personal gain, either their own personal gain or the personal gain of a member of their families. So this is a obvious, real conflict. But sometimes, of course, there are apparent conflicts. Right. Appearance of conflict is not covered in the Acts. Simply conflict of interest and potential conflict of interest, that's what's written into the Act. Thank you very much. Thank you again.
6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you to both guests for being here today. Welcome back to committee. Certainly a topic of interest and concern among the general public. We understand that the objectives, the sections of the Lobbyist Code of Conduct states that by complying with the rules of the code, lobbyists contribute to public confidence in the integrity of the federal government institutions and decision-making. Ms. Belanger, do you believe that Mr. Bains' role with Rogers contributes to the public confidence in government institutions?
Mr. Bain is first and foremost subject to the Lobbying Act, and until he communicates with public office holders, he's not subject to my code of conduct.
So within the code, Mr. Bains will be responsible, if I'm to understand correctly, in basically self-monitoring his time to determine whether or not he is in contravention of the code. Is that correct?
If Mr. Bain decides to communicate with federal officials, because he's the senior officer at Rogers, he's going to have to, actually the senior official at Rogers is going to have to add Mr. Bain's name to the registry. So if he ever communicates with federal officials, you would know because his name would be added on to the registry, and at that time he would be subject to the code.
And of course, that would include his former colleagues. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. It would include.
That would include his former cabinet colleagues. Is that correct?
His name in the registry will just be added on because he would be communicating with federal officials. Only if he communicates with cabinet members would then there be an oral and communication then added on to the registry. But if his name is just added to the registry as someone who communicates with federal officials, until he has an oral and arranged, you would only know the departments that he will be communicating with.
Okay. And so as reported in the media, he reached out to your office and received confirmation that he can accept the position without contravening provisions within the Lobbying Act as a former public holder. And you confirm that with him without him contravening his 5-year lobbying restriction set out in subsection 10.11, subsection 1?
As I've stated in my opening remarks, it's not my role to approve where people go work. I just have to make sure that they do not communicate with federal officials, because if they do, it's an offense. And then I investigate, and then I send to the RCMP. So my role is to make sure that wherever they go work, that they understand the rules, that they cannot communicate. However,
Correct.
Because Rogers is a corporation, he can communicate up to 20% of his time, which I don't understand why that is in the Act, but it's there.
Thank you. That is actually the lead-in question, which is, because I hear a little bit of frustration in your voice, or at least I'm perceiving that. And so I'm wondering if you could perhaps maybe just share a little bit about why that gap, why that exemption might actually undermine your ability to effectively rein in this perceived conflict or this perceived lobbying?
I am frustrated, and I do apologize to committee if I do sound frustrated, but this lobbying act has to be amended. And there are gaps and there are loopholes, and there is a lot of lobbying that can occur without people knowing, and now is the time to start fixing it. So, and I feel like a broken record when I keep repeating the issues with the act. And so, the issue here is not Mr. Baines, and he has said publicly that he will not communicate with federal officials, but the act would allow him to up to 20% of his time. So 1 day a week during a month. That's a lot of phone calls. And that's a problem.
Sorry, while we're on the topic, could you, I know it's a broken record, but it's one that I like hearing. Can you please just maybe recap some of the other ways in which you would close the gap on the lobbying loopholes that you've identified?
This one is the significant part of duty threshold for organizations and corporations. There has to be 30 hours a month of lobbying before an organization or corporation needs to register. That's a lot. So that gap needs to be closed. It should be transparency by default.
And would you agree that for particularly a former minister, you wouldn't need 30 hours, perhaps in some instances, a phone call to an old friend in cabinet might be enough to kind of open up doors that otherwise wouldn't be open for the corporation that you're now employed in?
Absolutely. I think it doesn't make sense that if you go work for a charitable organization, you can't pick up the phone at all, but if you go work for a corporation, you can. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I also acknowledge that your frustration isn't at us per se, but at these gaps that hopefully as a committee we can provide recommendations back to hopefully see the government finally move on them and close. Thank you. I'll concede the rest of my time.
Thank you for that, Mr. Green. Thank you, Madame Belanger. We are going to go to a second round, starting with 5 minutes. Monsieur Gourde, vous...
Merci, Monsieur.
You have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for their presence. This is very interesting. Let me get back to that 20% of time that can be allotted to lobbying. As you said, Ms. Belanger, this is a pretty considerable loophole. And people, of course, often get excellent jobs later and needn't even give 20% of their time to the organization or corporation, rather, just work, a small amount of time for an organization that's worth a lot of money. So investing $300,000 on a person, if they get a contract down the road for them, these corporations make back their money. It's just a matter of them following up on what they've planned. So what I find problematic, and it really interferes with the aims of your work, your objectives, is the public's view of these loopholes. If the loopholes stay there too long, and then it's too easy for them to sort of work around the law. Well, they're not even working around the law. That's what the law says. They'll be able to sort of do whatever they want, even though they're hoping that people perceive them as being trustworthy. So there's not much you can do. You can't even really rein them in. What should we do? It's not complicated. You'll have to rework the legislation. It's been there since 2008. Every 5 years, it should come up for review. It was only reviewed in 2012. That's 11 years ago. Let me get back to something here. Everything is about someone taking a job after they leave public office. Let's say we say 100% transparency. We change the law, and that's what we decide. If someone says, okay, but I'm giving my advice for free, I'm not being paid by this organization or corporation, maybe they'll get a check 10 years down the road if the contract comes through. But meanwhile, they'll be able to supposedly give advice for free, but with personal gain down the line. What do we do about that? Well, that's another matter that should be taken into account, the matter of payment. In the Yukon, for example, they added the concept of a directing mind. So if the person is paid or not, if the person has a certain power or influence, capacity to direct, then they're covered by the legislation. So that's something else that might be considered. But for all this, you have to be able to review the acts. All right. So if the person isn't necessarily registered, within that organization, it can require very careful reviews and investigations to find out what's going on. I mean, it's going to be difficult to close all those loopholes. I agree with you. It's not possible to imagine every single situation, but I think there's certainly plenty of room to improve the Act. Let me get back to ethics, Ms. Robinson. Right now, we have MPs. I mean, there are a number of lobbyists who try to reach us, who invite us to dinners, and so on and so forth. So as MPs, should we always pay for meals with lobbyists? Let's say it costs $90 to protect ourselves. I mean, let's be clear. Every evening, we're being asked to go out for dinner with someone or someone else in order to discuss their issues. As soon as it's a lobbyist, the position of the commissioner at present and the office of the commissioner is that no gift is acceptable. So you should pay for your entree, your meal, as soon as you're in the company of a registered lobbyist who is carrying out lobbying with a member of parliament. Whether or not there has been any lobbying, actually, that's the decision. The precedent is there that it is up to the member of parliament to pay for their own restaurant meal. And sometimes you don't even know if it's someone who wants to lobby you. Sometimes they just want to sit with you to be able to start discussing a topic, and you didn't even know they were going to. We should basically never accept a restaurant meal because we don't know what sort of conversation we'll be drawn into. Yes, the test is, might this reasonably lead anyone to believe that this has been offered to you in order to influence you. So if you have any significant activity with that person, individual, or corporation, in such a circumstance, you simply should not accept any gift from them. Thank you very much. Am I out of town? Yes. Thank you, Mr. Gold.
Go to Mr. Baines for 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for coming. And I will state that I have no relation with Mr. Baines in question. No, Monsieur Villemure will be happy to hear about that. My first question, actually, on the issue of frustration there with the 20% rule, how old is that at? Like, how old is that rule? How long has that been in place?
2008.
2008. Okay. And just in 2017, and we've heard about, over 200 members, I believe you mentioned, that have been advised about the rules around this before they leave, but then, not how many come back and actually check with, whether they're in compliance or not, varies. So, in 2017, for example, former Harper Government Minister of the Economic Development Agency of Canada for the regions of Quebec, Denis Lebel, was appointed as the CEO of the Quebec Forest Industry Council. So did this member reach out to Conflict of Interest or the Lobbying Commissioner's Office, either for both of you, actually, to ensure that the appointment was compliant?
I don't recall the specific file, unfortunately. However, as I've mentioned, if they contact the office, if a public office holder contacts the office, we examine the file, we review all the information that's provided, and we provide guidance and advice based on information that has been obtained either through the reporting public office holder or in the media, government websites, and so on and so forth. So I cannot comment. This is the normal course of action usually when a public office holder does contact the office.
Madame Belanger?
I also wasn't there in 2017. What I would think would happen, which is our process that we take, is when we see someone leave, we actually try to reach out. There's a lot of movement, but when we see people go, we try to reach out to give them their obligations, which is simply not to communicate with federal officials, but we don't really have a role to play in where they go work, as long as they understand the rules.
And I think I heard you mention someone who holds official power. So would a CEO be categorized as someone who holds official power?
yes, but I don't know if I'm the one.
Yeah.
Okay. And just on the issue of exemptions, I wanted to maybe ask a question around that. The Lobbying Act contains restrictions on former designated public office holders, including a 5-year prohibition on lobbying. However, individuals can apply to you for exemption from these restrictions. So can you please remind the committee the nature of these restrictions which are set out in the Act with respect to the post-employment period? And then maybe follow up with what circumstances there are to grant the exemption.
Okay, so anyone, there is a form online that anyone who wants to be exempted from the 5-year prohibition can make a request to the office. There is a non-exhaustive list in the Act that would allow for someone, for example, they were a student, they were in the office for 4 months in a ministerial office, someone who did administrative duties only, because, of course, not all DPOHs are created equal, but this rule applies equally to everyone. And that would be something to be looked at as well if the Act would be reviewed, because it could be a sliding scale depending on your role in your position. So we do look at the role they played, the network that they've created, because really at the end of the day, that's the purpose of the restriction, is to not take advantage of the connections and the people that you've gotten to know in the network for the benefit of your new employer or your client. And so we do look at the role, the function, the network, the length of time they've been there to decide whether or not an exemption can be granted. In the last year, I think we looked at 8. I did not grant any in the last year. I think I denied 6, and 2 were withdrawn. That will be in my annual report that you should all have access to tomorrow. So,
And could you maybe describe, without naming names, why would the exemption be denied?
mainly because of the types of network and the functions that they had. If they were someone who communicated with many departments, who was involved in many departments and had a very close relationship with people of authority, members of parliament, then we would not accept or grant the exemption, because they can take advantage of those jobs when they leave office to then communicate. So.
Okay, merci. Thank you, Madame Belanger, and thank you, Mr. No Relation Baines. Monsieur Villemure, vous avez...
Mr. Villemure, you have 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Okay, Ms. Belanger, to help you deal with this frustration, which is not solely yours, what would be the 3 improvements to the Act that you would suggest we undertake? 3 things besides that 20%. I always find it, unfortunate to point to 3 or 4 items, because the recommendations we made in 2021 were comprehensive. If you touch on one element, it, links into another. So if you ask me to tease out 3, I would say, okay, the threshold to be registered. The information that goes onto the register, that too could be fleshed out. It would help to have more information. And another frustration, I'm sorry, I'm not usually a very frustrated person. I just care about this. One other thing is the monthly reports about communications. It has to be drawn up by someone. It depends on who draws it up, you see. So all the impromptu verbal communications don't need to go on that list. And that's a little unusual, because there can be a number of communications that don't get into the register simply because they weren't planned in advance, because everything that goes on there has to be sort of planned in advance. That's the current way it's done. So that should change. Right now, I either make a report to comment or I send a file to the RCMP. There's nothing in between. So having something in between would be helpful, more tools, because, not everything is at the same level of noncompliance. All right. So I understand from you that you feel 2012, that was some time ago, and it's time to review the Act because lobbying activities are growing on the Hill. Yes, indeed, they are. Thank you very much.
See, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Villeneuve. Thank you for respecting your time.
5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I'm going to put this question to both of you. A Financial Post article quotes the founding executive director of McMaster's public policy program, who stated the following. It does seem like sort of an obvious or blatant hire that says, quote, this person was a liberal insider who was in charge of policies in our industry, and now we're going to leverage his knowledge and insight in our benefit. It sort of seems like a classic instance of regulatory capture, end quote. Do you believe that the Lobbying Act and the Conflict of Interest Act allow for regulatory capture? We can begin with you, Ms. Belanger.
Well, I will repeat myself. Obviously, there is a gap in the Lobbying Act, and I think it needs to be fixed. But I'm applying the law as stated now, and I think if it should be broader, then it needs to be looked at.
Ms. Robson-Delpech?
It's the same thing for under the Conflict of Interest Act. We interpret the act as it is written. It was legislators determined that the sections, for example, sections 33 and 34 are the only two that continue to apply after a cooling off period. And 33 and 34 are quite specific. And we can't, it's inappropriate for us to speculate that there's a violation that public office holder, when they accept employment, there's a violation of Section 33 or 34 automatically. We have to wait for facts and see where we, if there are facts that are brought to our attention, we will look into it.
So in a very succinct way, do you believe that the Act could potentially allow for regulatory capture as it is now?
Well, based on the situation that we have before us, I would say yes.
Ms. Belanger?
I'll say yes as well.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. Thank you to both our witnesses. Got two more rounds of 5 minutes. We're going to go with Mr. Couric, followed by Ms. Khalid. Go ahead, Mr. Couric, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for coming here today. One of the consistent concerns that I've heard from constituents and others that have reached out is the cloud of suspicion and doubt that is raised when somebody like a former industry minister takes a job, and what I imagine is a fairly well-paying job, with a company that is highly regulated and dependent on government. So, and it's certainly not the first time. I know John Manley from a previous Liberal government had also taken a job. I believe he sits on the board of TELUS, so it's not a unique experience. But certainly, when you're the minister in charge of the regulatory agency that basically allows a company to live or die. And I'm simplifying things, but I think for the way that many Canadians see it, the perception of conflict is there, certainly in the eyes of the public. I'm wondering if that's something that a statement that Commissioner, you would agree with, and I forget your exact compliance officer, I think, or director of compliance. Yeah. So commissioner and director. I'm wondering if that's something that you would agree with, that perception of conflict, that cloud of doubt exists.
Yes, possibly. What I would say that in this case, with respect to the lobbying, it would appear that Mr. Bains will not be lobbying the federal officials. If he were to, however, he'd be subject to the Code of Conduct, and I am hoping that the code is pretty prescriptive, as you all know, you've all studied it, and therefore there are many people that he would probably not likely be able to speak to in light of the Code of Conduct. So I'm confident that the regime, of course, with the weaknesses that exist, that we've got some parameters in place to try and reduce that risk of actual conflict or sense of obligation being created.
And Ms. Robinson Delpay, hopefully I'm
Yes.
saying that correctly.
And under the Conflict of Interest Act, as I mentioned previously, we do not look at perceptions of conflicts of interest. The Act is quite specific that conflicts of interest must be either true conflicts of real conflicts of interest or opportunities or so potential conflicts of interest.
So, and it's again that cloud that exists, right? Because how can we be sure that the former minister wouldn't be in touch with some of his former cabinet colleagues? Certainly, the information that he would have learned over the course of his time as minister would be highly relevant to the operations of a highly regulated company that is dependent on that. So again, how can we be sure of these things, Ms.
Again,
Robinson
the Act is a good faith system, and when we look at the sections 33 and 34, the office has to be provided with information to the effect that those two sections are being violated or have been contravened. We can't speculate and say, oh, because this person accepted a position at that company, automatically there's a contravention of sections 33 or 34. There has to be some information that leads us to believe that a contravention has occurred. And
Thank you. And yeah.
Can I add, with respect to the Lobbying Act, if anyone lobbies when they're restricted, it is an offense. And so there is a risk that this will go to the RCMP. And I think that is sort of I'm hoping that it helps people to a detriment, exactly, for people not to be communicating when they shouldn't be. But again, there's that 20% that allows.
Okay, and Director, one of the concerns that was highlighted to me was the timing. We had an interim ethics commissioner right around the time that Mr. Baines took the position, and just the timing of that. And again, it's the perception that the cloud of doubt surrounding this. I'm wondering if you have any comments just around the timing of that.
Well, again, there were no decisions required by a commissioner on this particular file. Therefore, essentially, it was based on information. There was no, the cooling off period was lapsed, and therefore there was no rules that required a decision. And at that point, the advisor went back and communicated that the rules did no longer apply. The prohibitions no longer applied, but that the former minister had to be mindful of sections 33 and 34.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk. Ms. Khalid, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First and foremost, I'll start through you, Mr. Chair, by thanking our witnesses for not only appearing here today, but for the important work that you do in building and maintaining trust, public trust in our democratic institutions. I think the work that you and your offices do is extremely important. Mr. Chair, I will ask if perhaps, I know that there were a number of members that had asked questions that we were not able to get answers to, so perhaps if we can send those questions in writing and get written responses once our witnesses are able to do so, if that's amenable to you, Chair.
Sure. If members have questions they want to ask, they can write the commissioner's offices.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Chair. And with that, I cede my time, and I, again, just really thank you for being here today.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Khalid. So that leaves me some time to ask a question, which I'm going to do. Ms. Belanger, you've been before this committee for several appearances during the Lobbying Code of Conduct. Your frustration is palpable when it comes to updating the legislation. You mentioned earlier that it was last updated in 2012.
It wasn't updated, it was reviewed.
It was reviewed in 2012, which was 11 years ago. Typically, these types of reviews happen every 5 years. Why hasn't it happened, in your opinion?
Good question. I was asked when I appeared at this committee on my nomination in 2017 if I could be ready in the spring of 2018 to offer recommendations. I said, well, that'll be 4 months in my job. I'll do my best. And so I prepared. I started right from the time I started my position, and the time went by. And then in 2021, during an appearance here, someone said, oh, why don't you send us some recommendations? Which I did. And I prepared in February of 2021 and I called them preliminary recommendations because there was no study at the time, so I thought, I'll just say these are preliminary. In the event that there is a study, it gives me the opportunity to change my mind or add some. And that was in February 2021, so now it's more than 2 years.
So typically, who would initiate that update? Would it?
In this case, according to my act, I think it would be the House.
Okay.
You, if you want to.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
That is good news, isn't it?
Good to know. I'm going to ask the committee members just to hold back. I do have a couple of pieces of information that I have to deal with. One includes a study budget. But Ms. Belanger and Madame Robinson-Dalpé, thank you for coming before committee today. I appreciate your willingness, especially Madame Robinson-Dalpé. I know this isn't in your job description, but you did accord yourself very, very well, very knowledgeable in front of the committee, and I want to thank you for that. So I'm going to dismiss the witnesses, and then we're going to continue. We're not going to suspend. The first item that I have is a study budget for this particular motion that we are dealing with. The amount requested is up to $500. Do I have consensus on the 500? Matt, I see your thumb. I see heads nodding. Okay, Madam Clerk, is that clear? Second thing I have is a letter that came to the committee from the chair of the Standing Committee on Finance, just reminding us that pre-budget consultations are taking place, and if there's anything that this committee, any direction on pre-budget consultations that we'd like to give to the Finance Committee, that opportunity is available to us. Mr. Couric, on that issue. Monsieur Villemure, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And I understand that there's some questions around the timelines, whether or not we need this by the end of June or maybe if it can be into the fall. But I know certainly one of the consistent themes, and with one of the independent officers of Parliament and another office represented in the meeting here today, I think it's especially relevant that one of the concerns we've heard consistently is that when the funding for these offices is contingent upon the political will of a current government, certainly there's some challenges with that. So I'm not sure if other members have more to add to that, but that may be one of the suggestions that we give to the Finance Committee. And I know the other committees that I've been on, we've been faced with these questions as well. But particularly relevant, I think, is that every commissioner has said we need to take the politics out of how their offices are financed and make sure that Parliament is the one that makes that decision, since they are independent offices of Parliament. So I think that that certainly from my perspective, that would be a valuable a message to pass along to the Finance Committee. It's maybe not asking necessarily for more money, but more of a process that is and as a fiscal conservative, that's certainly but just to make sure that the politics and the appearance of conflict, especially when you have, we were talking about a former Liberal cabinet minister that has taken a lucrative job at a corporation, and just questions surrounding the integrity of that, and to ensure that it's not friends of that cabinet minister, whether it's the current government or any previous government, to ensure that there it is Parliament and as the chief arbiter of the land that is making those decisions, and not a particular cabinet minister or a particular cabinet or a particular government. I think that's a consistent theme we've heard from all of the commissioners that have come before this committee, and would be worth passing on. Thanks.
Just So the committee is aware Mr. Fonseca did submit a deadline of July 31st on a couple of issues. Number one, whether we would like to appear before the committee as a committee making a request, and any suggestions that they might have. So, Monsieur Villemure, prochaine, s'il vous plaît.
You're next, sir, Mr. Vermeer. Yes, thank you. The motion would read as follows. Notwithstanding the committee's wish to respond positively to the Finances Committee request about pre-budgetary consultations, we would like to maintain latitude to review our priorities when we return to the House in September. As of the first week of that return, the committee would like to discuss its priorities and how to organize its timeline for studies. We have copies in French and in English for you.
Sure. Just, est-ce que vous avez...
Do you have you shared this? Have you circulated it? And to begin with, have you given it to the clerk?
Dans les deux langues.
In both official languages, please.
I don't, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to, Mr. Villemure has the floor, so on va continuer avec René.
So we'll continue with Mr. Vermeer. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. All right. So despite the point that my colleague here has brought up to the effect that the three commissioners should have more latitude, more financial independence, I think that that is something we should consider in greater depth. Last-minute answers or discussion isn't really useful. I think we should rather take this more seriously and look into it before we discuss it.
Also, René, le committee...
Very well. The Standing Committee on Finance has asked whether we would like to hold a meeting in September about pre-budget consultations to see whether we have any suggestions for the Standing Committee on Finance at that time.
Please, Ms. Khalid.
There we go. Thanks, Chair. I agree in principle with this motion, absolutely fine. But I obviously have been waiting a very, very long time, Chair, to start my TikTok study. I think that is the more pressing issue of the day. So I would like to, if Mr. Villemure would allow, to limit this to maximum of one meeting to have that conversation, if that's okay. Or 1 hour would be preferable. I think we all know what our priorities are, but I really am quite wanting to get to that TikTok study, Chair.
So we can, we'd have to amend the motion to reflect that it just occur for 1 hour. Okay, we still have the issue though, and this is the challenge that I have, that Mr. Fonseca wants us to meet before July 31st. I'm just going to get clarification on this from the clerk. Just stand by a sec, please. So, yeah, and I appreciate your patience on that. Right, it's the first time I've had to deal with this as chair on pre-budget consultations. So the first question that Mr. Fonseca had for the committee is whether he'd like to know if we'd be interested in participating in next fall's pre-budget consultations. They're reaching out similarly to other committees. And the second thing that he is asking us whether the committee would be interested in participating in the study of any such subject matter contained in the bill. So that's something that that we would have to determine. But I think Mr. Villemure's motion may address that. So ICRA's amending it to say 1 hour, right? Est-ce que vous êtes en accord avec ça?
Do you agree?
The motion to reflect 1 hour of committee time on this. So any other discussion on the amendment, first of all, for 1 hour? We're good? Okay. And then on the main motion as amended? Okay, we're good? Consensus? Okay, that's it. Lastly, I don't have any other business before us before the end of the session. We do have a meeting that's scheduled on Friday. At this point, I'm still going to hold on to that meeting, but it may be required that we cancel that meeting, just to let everybody aware of that. But that's it for today. So I want to thank
Chair.
the committee. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I just have a motion.
That was close.
It was
Go ahead.
I'd like to move that we adjourn.
Okay.
This guy's got jokes.
You had me worried too. He was going to get it. Okay, so we've got a motion to adjourn. First, before we do, I just want to say thank you to the analysts. Thank you to our clerk, all of the technicians for all of the work that you've done this session. And I do want to say thank you to Sabrina. We are unfortunately going to be losing Sabrina on this committee. Do we have consensus on nay? But Sabrina, thanks for all your help and your guidance on this and on everything. And we wish you all the best in your future endeavors. And Alexander, not you. You're not leaving.
Oh, no.
Okay.
I'm a lifer.
Okay, good.
I was just going to say she will be back for the consideration of the
Yes.
report.
Yeah, just from a continuity standpoint, we appreciate that. So thank you all. This meeting is adjourned.
you.